It's my honor to welcome Jim Wolfston, the president of CollegeNET, to the podium.
Good morning, and thank you so much for that warm welcome. It's great to start out a Monday morning with some applause. It doesn't happen very often. But I have to tell you that I want to reflect your appreciation towards me. This is an extraordinary opportunity that we have working together. What we do will largely determine how efficiently higher education is delivered in our world through our scheduling products, through our admissions products. It can also affect accessibility for students. What kind of students will make up the classes of the future in higher education? So I really appreciate this opportunity to innovate with you. There's really three things that we can do together. We can innovate product, we can also innovate the way we look at the future of products, and we can actually innovate the way in which we function within the capitalist system, within the global economy. And I'm going to be talking about all three of those things. Now, strangely, paradoxes actually create an important role. Quite often paradoxes are sort of interesting sidebars, contradictions that exist. I remember when I took this class in automata theory in computer science, I was a graduate student in computer science, that contradictions or paradoxes were used to disprove conjectures. We took automata theory. It sounds like it's got to do with robots. It doesn't. It has to do with algorithms. It's mostly mathematical. And we took these proofs, and a conjecture was made, and it was attempted to determine whether it was true or false. If it led to a paradox, then it was a problem, and you could discard it. Right? And that's pretty much the way I looked at paradoxes. I thought, hey, that's what's going on here. Now, it turns out, however, that paradoxes are ubiquitous. They turn out to exist in all sorts of places, and I'll be describing a little bit of that. But I want to talk about why. Why is it so important to have an effect on the future? What is this great opportunity that we have? And to illustrate that, I'm going to show you a slide here. Look at the pace of change that's happening in our world. It's not just that the world is changing, it's changing faster and faster and faster. 250 years ago when this country was founded, you could define the future. You could have a hand in defining the future for your children if you understood traditions, if you understood the Bible, if you understood the Quran, if you understood the Torah, if you understood the Constitution. You could pass traditions to your children. You could help define the future by propounding traditions. You could do that. But increasingly, what's happening in our world is that the future isn't being defined by tradition. It used to be, at that time, 250 years ago, lifespans were 30, 35, or 40 years old. You can see the flat part of this curve. That was about 200 years ago. It was going to be next year pretty much the way it was the year before, the decade before. That's not the case. The world's changing radically and really fast. And what's making it happen, for good or for bad, is the innovators. It's us. It's you and me. And I can't do this without you. You people, by self-selection, are innovators. You're creatives. You're the most activist users that we have. The 500 or so people who are most heavily involved in talking about our products, figuring out how they should work better, making a difference. You're self-selected as innovators. And our opportunity to innovate is really the same thing as the opportunity to define the future for our children. How many people here have kids? Anybody? Oh my gosh, yeah, just about everybody. And even if you don't have kids, you also care about the students at the institutions where you work. You know they're a message to the future, that what the institution does in many respects is to transmit knowledge from one generation to the next and to develop new knowledge. We understand that. So we have a stake, we have an opportunity if we can define inventions, if we can look at the future in a different way, and if we can recast the way we behave as a capitalist society, how we behave as a group within the global economy. We have a chance to change the world. It's happening. It's really exciting. You can feel it at CollegeNET. We can feel it with you. And I really appreciate this opportunity, greatly appreciate this opportunity, because personally, I want to change the world. I want to make a big impact in the world. And by virtue of your working with me and working with us, that's possible. So thank you very, very much. So how do we work together? What is this? Is this just pandering to the audience that the CEO does? No. It turns out that in order to innovate, it's similar to natural selection in the sense that CollegeNET's responsible for hatching variations. You've seen our scheduling products change over the years. We started with a big mainframe system that automated classroom scheduling. We moved into mini computers. We moved into microcomputers. We were the first to do SAS-based classroom and event scheduling for universities. Now we're doing handhelds. So we keep that evolution happening, but the way that's happening is from the selective force that you exert. You say yes or no to the variations that we hatch. As I said before in other speeches, it's got to do with, it's a parallel to natural selection. We hatch variations, you make choices. You have the power to decide what comes out of this circle of innovation. But it's not just the fact that you make the choices, that you say yes or no. It's also the case that many of you users are very, very activist users. For example, the system that you're going to use to evaluate this conference actually came out of this kind of speech. I gave a speech. Stanford University came up to me afterwards 5 or 6 years ago and said, we want to find a better way to do faculty and course evaluation. And they decided to work with us to create the system that you're now going to use to evaluate this conference. And by the way, it's available on your Android, available on your iPhone. It came out of this conference. Stanford again made a big difference, is making a big difference now. CollegeNET's involved in trying to rid the system, the international system, of fraud in terms of credentials coming from overseas. Stanford's a real prime mover in that work with us. Judith Hakau, I don't know where you are, Judith. Judith is a user who stepped up and written, for example, to the Netherlands to say, yes, we affirm and agree with the idea of electronic credentials being attached to the admissions application. So many of you are involved, not just in saying yes or no to the variations that CollegeNET hatches, but also causing them to occur. So there's a kind of blur here. It's not that simple where CollegeNET hatches the variations and you say yes or no. That's the fundamental relationship that we have, but it's even more activist because of your creative thinking. But the problem with this is that we're both blind, okay? Here's the problem. I'm blind and you're blind. Now, I'm going to hit on you here just a little bit about your blindness, all right? When we started classroom scheduling, people said, no, there's no way we can do classroom scheduling. We're going to say no to that. I heard so many no's at the beginning because people said, look, this has to do with faculty. This has to do with sensitivities of faculty. Are you telling me a computer is going to be involved in that? I'm sorry. There's just no way. All right? So blindfolds. Of course, every one of you uses some kind of automated classroom scheduling, whether it has to do with CollegeNET or some other organization that competes with us. So we know that's real. If we could have taken off those blinders, we could have moved faster together to innovate the world. Same thing with admissions, believe it or not. 20 years ago, people were saying to me, well, what are we going to do about signatures? How are we going to handle the signature? Oh, wait a minute, you're talking about having a payment on the internet? There's no way. We can't do that, that's not safe. Or what if we make a mistake when we're doing the admissions application and the internet connection gets dropped? People didn't understand that the browser is actually running on the computer itself, and only when you press send does the internet connection actually matter. So we got these objections. We got these objections because people were wearing blinders. So my objective this morning is to try to drop those blinders just a little bit. But it's in talking about paradox, helping you understand some of the ways in which CollegeNET's thinking about innovation, thinking about managing ourselves, and thinking about our role in the global economy. But it's not just you that has blinders. Let me tell you, we have blinders too. We're like all innovators, all people who hatch variations, we have blinders. Now this is a picture that was serious back in the 1950s as to how the future would look. Now you notice it's all white people, it looks like Ozzie and Harriet. There's no black people, there's no Asians, there's no Latinos. He's got a leather mail bag, and there's some amalgamation with this propulsion. He's gonna still deliver the mail. This isn't email. This is the future. This is a satchel with paper letters in it, and the guy's being propelled by some kind of cool thruster, right? We do a lot of that too. There's a lot of artifacts in what I call the CollegeNET graveyard, ideas that we had that just didn't quite make it. So, how do paradoxes play in this? Paradoxes are really interesting. They exist everywhere. Now, think about this. Okay, we know that clocks run clockwise, right? And what that means is that the arm on the clock, right, it moves from the left, my left, your left, to the right, right? There we go. Watch it again. This is clockwise, right? Right? No, it's not. It is if I turn around. If I go like this, it's now clockwise. Okay, so here, there's a paradox. Now, we don't see the other side of the paradox because there's this thing called the face that hides it from us, but that's a paradox, right? Now, look on your table. Anybody have a glass that's half empty? All right, I've got one here. Thank you for that pause. It's both half empty and half full, right? There's a paradox. Now, what about the fact that the glasses that are on the table look to me? Do you agree that they're still? Are they still? Does anybody have a glass that's independently moving? That'd be weird, wouldn't it? Well, guess what? Your glass is moving. It's moving 600 miles per hour with respect to the Earth's axis. Not only is it, while it's still on your table, it's moving 600 miles per hour with respect to the axis of the Earth, but it's also moving 37,000 miles per hour with respect to the sun. And how many other ways is it moving depending upon the frame of reference? So we have this paradox that exists with your humble glass. Now there's another paradox about that glass, and the paradox is that the glass is inanimate, right? It's not moving. Well, guess what? If you actually peer down inside of it, the atoms that exist that make it up are vibrating all the time. You can't get rid of the vibration in matter. The inanimate is built from the animated, right? So if we take, for example, helium, and we take it to absolute zero, you can't even make it a solid. It has to be liquid. It still vibrates. You have to put it under pressure to make it a solid. And even when you make something a solid, even when you make something solid like this or the microphone, it is animated. So paradoxically, our whole world of inanimate things is based upon those things which move. And we have in our social life paradoxes, right? How many people have experienced this where you sit at a table and you're trying to socialize and you're dealing with people who are busy on their handhelds, socializing with Facebook, Twitter, or whatever, right? So here's this paradox where the social media are in fact quite often antisocial. We also have this interesting paradox where, for whatever reason, babies, newborns, look like the old Winston Churchill. So paradoxes are ubiquitous. They're all over the place. If you start looking for them, you find out that these things are really important, very interesting. Annie Resnick from the Coalition, I talked to her last night, and she told me there's a Shakespeare statement. I thought, wow, that's really impression. And truth lies in paradoxes. Is that pretty? Truth lies in paradoxes. Well, why do they lie in CollegeNET's innovations? Let's look at Schedule 25. Let's look at our scheduling system. Are there any paradoxes here? Now keep in mind, those of you who aren't using our scheduling products, what Schedule 25 does, it's the fundamental algorithm that's used to optimize the allocation of classes into classrooms. All right? You press the button, you set up the definitions, and it goes and it figures out where the faculty should go. So there's this guy named Arthur Eddington, a very interesting guy. He was a physicist in England. He came up with something called the Eddington number. It was an estimate of the number of atoms in the universe. And here's that number. It's 10 to the 80th. This is called the Eddington number. Pretty big number. Now imagine if we had to look at each one of those atoms, and not only look at each one of those atoms, but we had to somehow compare those atoms to each other in order to find the best atom, right? That'd be a lot of work. A lot more work than any computer can perform. But guess what? In classroom scheduling is this devious, horrible number. It's way worse than the number of atoms in the universe. 100 to 1,000. And this is the decimal expansion of that. Now this includes what mathematicians call degenerate schedules. For example, you take all the classes and you put them in one room. Well, you're not going to do that. You're going to throw that away. That's ridiculous. But imagine if there's a billion degenerate schedules, ones that are so ridiculous you wouldn't consider them, for everyone that's worthy of consideration. A billion! Well, all you do to reduce the number of possibilities here is to lop off the last 9 zeros. And you'd still be left with something that's gargantuan. When CollegeNet was first working on this problem, we didn't really understand this issue. We actually CollegeNET proved the NP completeness of classroom scheduling. But the reason that problem was considered so difficult was because people thought, oh, wait a minute, now we got to worry about no conflict. We got to make sure that the faculty are close to their offices. We got to make sure there's a certain fill ratio. We got to make sure certain classroom equipment is in place. We got to make sure there's passing time between classes. It just is too crazy. Well, guess what? Paradoxically, the more complications you could throw at us, the better. The better. Because as those complications got thrown at this problem, it reduced very handsomely the number of possibilities that you'd even need to consider by computer, you see. So the more complicated that problem is, the faster the algorithm can run, the simpler it is. There's a paradox. What about admissions? Here again at Stanford University, right? You don't see CollegeNet, but in fact CollegeNet's hosting that admissions application. Well, that was a kind of heresy back in the so-called new economy. New economy, there's this hubris that the internet's out, and there's this guru named Tom Peters who pronounced that, I know this may sound like selfishness, but being the CEO of Me Inc. requires you to act selfishly, to grow yourself and to promote yourself, to get the market to reward yourself. And he became a guru and wrote extensively about this sort of thing. And there are all these swaggering people running around talking about the new economy, casket.com and pets.com and all this other great stuff, raising huge amounts of money. The brand called you, right? Well, CollegeNet defied that. We said, no way. We're going to flip that. We said we could advance our company. We could advance our brand by submerging it. And all the companies, frankly, that we competed against at that time, many of them are just gone. One of them raised $75 million and did MTV ads, and they believed that they could create the brand called them, and that every university would just come to them in obeisance, and so they could get students. Well, we said, that's ridiculous. Give me a break. So, admissions paradox, advance your brand by submerging it. Now, here's a really interesting paradox that actually contains two paradoxes. This is already a million-plus business for CollegeNet, and it's zooming to 3 million very shortly. This is a business that's based on the idea that payables are receivables. Huh? Yeah, we have a hospital that we are actually giving $250,000 a year to, and we make money doing that. So we do it because the payable that the hospital has, we deconstruct that, and we give the recipient the opportunity to get their money faster. And for that privilege and opportunity, they'll pay. So we've actually deconstructed payables to make them receivables for both the hospital and for CollegeNet. And we're doing this for universities, and we signed one of our biggest contracts last year with United Surgical Partners. So this is on a Zoom, and it's based on two paradoxes. Same thing with Standout. Standout, you're going to see, after my presentation, you're going to see a discussion of something that is so cool. I'm really excited about this. We've gotten 2 patents on this. Now, one of the objections we're getting now from the blindfold is, well, no, we can't do hiring. We can't do hiring through a system that entails interviews that are scripted by computer. That's just not what we do here. We have to do it in person. And believe me, I have a sense of that too. I enjoy doing interviews of prospective employees. It's a lot of fun. But whether or not it's scientific and whether or not it actually produces the best hires, I'm not sure of that. Neither is Daniel Kahneman, Nobel laureate, who wrote a book called Thinking Fast and Slow. He said there should be a better way to hire people. And we know at your university, given the fact that tuition is rising, we know it's really important for you to make good as best you can for your students in terms of helping them be successful, to help them not just succeed at their university studies, but to succeed in finding remunerative work. Because after all, they've been stuck quite often with a very, very large tuition bill. So CollegeNet's stepping in to help that problem because we're bringing a new network. It's a network of employers, it's a network of universities, it's a network of students that's founded around the idea that you can start with the interview. You can script an interview, but to get around this problem of interviews lack spontaneity, we've performed this cool paradox that Jeff Bolton will be showing you. Scripted spontaneity. Another area that's really an important fecund opportunity for us is our work with the Coalition. The Coalition is a group of 50, 60, 70 schools. I think it's actually bigger than that now. I think we've got 80-some schools that are working with us directly on this. Elite institutions that are trying to make education affordable and accessible. Now that's a noble goal, because we know that one of the big problems that we have in our culture is the tuition bomb. Through that tuition bomb, we've erected this huge gate that prevents people who are economically disadvantaged from attending college. And that's stupid from a human capital development standpoint, because some of the greatest, smartest people have been ones who've come from humble backgrounds. Frederick Gauss, for example, was a peasant. Rutherford, the great physicist, came from a humble background. So we need to open those doors up, if possible. And so I applaud the wonderful objective of the Coalition, which is to make elite education more affordable, more accessible. And we've got something really exciting. We've got this genius working at CollegeNet named Dr. Hertz Chen, and he has a bunch of database wizards working with him who figured out how they can apply what we call the paradox of scale to provide an opportunity for these elite institutions to find students who are disadvantaged. Now, normally you'd think the only way you can determine whether somebody's truly disadvantaged economically is to look at the parent's tax return, right? Now, how are you going to find these people? You kind of guesswork. So the paradox of scale says I cannot, if I smoke cigarettes, I don't know if I'm going to live or die. And no scientist can tell me whether that's going to affect my lifespan individually. It's not determinable. No scientist has the way of determining if I smoke cigarettes, it's going to cause cancer. Nobody, right? But for a population of 1,000 people, if you take 1,000 people who smoke cigarettes, you take 1,000 people who do not smoke cigarettes, guaranteed, with certainty, the population with 1,000 people will develop more cancer than those who don't. So there's this paradox of scale. You can build certainty from uncertainty. You have individuals about whose outcomes are uncertain, but you can develop certainty from that. That's weird. But we're applying that paradox with respect to helping the Coalition understand that the populations of students they're working with are very, very, very likely to be ones from economically disadvantaged backgrounds. We haven't released this yet, but it's something I'm really excited about. So you can see that paradoxes pervade our products. They're sneaky, they're everywhere. They're ubiquitous in our everyday lives. Well, how about the management of CollegeNet? How about the way we conduct ourselves as a business? Well, there's a really important paradox that I apply and other people at CollegeNet apply when we're thinking about our products, when we're thinking about ourselves, when we're thinking about our role. And it's what I call the skepticism belief paradox. These things have to be operating simultaneously. I say, for example, I'm smarter because I know I'm stupider than I think. Okay? Yeah, I'm smarter because I know I'm stupider than I think. That's really important to have that wariness about how smart you think you happen to be, especially in technology, especially with that curve I was showing you. Things change so quickly. You got to be ready. At the same time you're thinking about the future, you might be thinking about a three-legged table instead of four-legged tables and want the world to follow on. And you've got reasons why three-legged tables are more efficient. They cost less because there's only 3 legs instead of 4, and so on and so forth. You might be arguing for that and thinking about that, so you have to have belief in the possibility that you're propounding, but you also have to have skepticism about what's going on right now. And when the tables turn, no pun intended, you end up having to be skeptical about your own stuff. That's why our scheduling products keep changing, because we're skeptical about the way they exist today. We have to both promote them, but we have to be skeptical about them at the same time. And there's no guarantees for CollegeNet. We think we're onto something here. We think it's very helpful to have this skepticism belief paradox at work. But there's no guarantee for us at all. We know that. And there's certainly no guarantee for the high and mighty. Here's a guy who died very, very rich, right? You see what he said? Now, this guy had a Medal of Innovation from the United States of America. A great innovator. Really. Ken Olsen was a superstar back in the 70s and 80s. He was the prime mover, MIT PhD for mini computers. But he said things like, I'll never trust a computer I can fit in my trunk, okay? He also said there's no reason for any individual to have a computer in his home, right? Well, sorry, Ken, and that's why digital equipment dissolved as a subsidiary of Compaq Computer. It was a challenge to IBM. They were on an upswing, but he failed to doubt his own stuff. He failed to doubt the mini computer. It was so successful that he was blinded by that. So, we're applying paradox to the way we think and manage CollegeNET. But here's where the really fun begins. This is the great opportunity, and thank you so much for this opportunity. We are applying paradox to rethink our role in capitalism and the global economy. There's two problems with capitalism. Now, quite often, people in higher ed think that, well, the problem with capitalism is that stupid thing called profit. You're a horrible person. You take profits. It's a bad thing. Well, if you've owned a home and you've bought it for $200,000 and you sold it for $250,000, you made a profit. Hey, what's wrong with that? Now, profit actually is a nugget of problem, and I'll get to that in a bit. But the solution to the problems of capitalism is not nonprofit. We compete with nonprofits. I've talked with some of the biggest leaders in nonprofits in the United States. In fact, I talked with one of the guys, I won't mention his name, but he said to me, yeah, we're not for profit, but we're not for loss either. And what happens there is that you rename profit surplus. That's what you do in a nonprofit. It doesn't change it, doesn't make it go away. And you also have the advantage you don't pay any taxes. Gosh, I'd like to have that advantage, because if CollegeNet didn't pay any taxes, we wouldn't have to contribute to roadways, to police, to fire. We wouldn't have to contribute to those common things. We could just keep the money for ourselves. Wouldn't that be great? Okay? That's not the problem with capitalism. It's not the problem with capitalism. Here's one of the two major problems with capitalism that CollegeNet's actually dealing with. It's called economic divergence. How many people have read or are familiar with the book Capital in the 21st Century? Anybody read this book? Wow, I'm telling you, this book is so important. You got to at least take a look at it. It's really, really important. This guy came up with this tremendous insight. This just happened about a year and a half ago. A guy named Thomas Piketty, a French economist, on what is actually going on, no matter what the capitalism is, whether it's the capitalism that's practiced in the United States of America, whether it's capitalism that's practiced in China, which is different, by the way, and the capitalism that's practiced in Europe, which is also different. It's kind of social capitalism. Right? So we've had this kind of historic debate about socialism versus capitalism. That's way oversimplified. There's all kinds of variants of capitalism. And there's this important nugget of problem that's happening inside capitalism, and it's called divergence. Right now, the United States is like it was in 1928 in terms of the division between rich and poor. It's as bad as it was then. And it's considered to be a precursor, an important precursor to the Great Depression, right? Well, here's how this works. Look at R. R is the return on capital, which worldwide is about 4 or 5% per annum across all investments, whether it's your property, whether it's your stocks, whether it's derivatives or whatever kooky thing you can think to invest in. On average, it's about 4 or 5%, right? Now, this has a diverging effect. It makes the rich richer. Let's suppose that, for example, you have $100,000 of wealth, and I've got only $10,000. But we have a great year. It's a great year where R isn't 4 or 5%, it's 100%, right? Now the gap between us right now, and with my wealth at $10,000 and yours at $100,000, is $90,000. But if R is 100% for us over, say, a period of 10 years, now my $10,000 has become $20,000. Yeah, baby. But your $100,000 has become $200,000. So instead of being $90,000 apart, we're now $180,000 apart. That's the way R works. The people with the capital get the returns, and they pull away from, quote unquote, the rest of us. Now, half in any kind of civilized capitalist society, it doesn't matter whether it's in Germany, whether it's in the United States, whether it's in France, wherever, half of the people have no wealth at all. It's their net wealth in this country, half of the people is zero. So they don't get to play in R. R has no effect on them. Whoever has capital is pulling away from them enormously. Now, countervailing that is growth in income, right? Now, growth in income works in terms of converging, bringing people together. Let me explain how this works. The way G works is, suppose I'm making $25,000 a year and you're making $50,000 a year, right? And suppose income, G is growth in income, suppose that's spread evenly across our population. And that income grows by, on average, for every individual in our society by $25,000. Now, when we started, I was making $25,000 a year, you were making 50, I was making half of what you're making, right? But by virtue of the fact that we each get $25,000, now I'm making $50,000 and you're making $75,000. Now I make 66% of what you are making. And if that keeps going to the point where I make $1 million a year, and I become one of these fat cats, guess what? You're making $1,025,000. We're practically the same. So over time, G brings us together. And if R is greater than G, the economy diverges. It's not a statement against capitalism, it's just a fact of what occurs in any capitalist society. Divergence is inherent unless there are converging forces to tamp this down. One of the converging forces is government. And when it's well done, when it's well and efficiently operated, which is a big if, it's a converging factor. For example, the government takes in taxes, it builds roadways. All of us benefit from roadways. It builds the internet, it builds hospitals, it provides a police department, it provides military. It provides benefit for everyone, so it happens to be a converging force in its best form. Well, here's what's happening, unfortunately, in the United States. That after the first recession, the first post-war recession, the income gains that were attributed to G, right, they weren't being distributed, they were distributing very evenly across our economy. 80% of the income gains following the first recession, post-war, went to 90% of the people. That's the blue bar on the left. And the little red bar on the right is the proportion of income growth that went to the top 10%. 20% of the income growth went to the top 10% of the wage earners of this country. Now look what's happened over time. Since the last Great Recession, the bottom 90% of our wage earners have actually lost ground. That's why the blue bar is actually upside down. Notice the change, sort of the pivot that happened starting at about 1980. What the heck was going on? Well, what's going on is that in 1983, there was this gargantuan amount of money spent by the very wealthy. By the way, anybody here have a lobbyist in Washington? Do you have a lobbyist in Washington? I don't either. But there was $200 million spent in 1983 on lobbyists to rejigger the rules, I guess. That's a lot of money. Well, it doesn't even compare. 20 years later, the amount was $1.82 billion spent by wealthy people to refactor government. And then finally, this is what's going on as recent as 2012. We have $3.3 billion being spent, not by us, but by very wealthy interests to change the stripes on the playing field. This is a problem. It's not helping because one of the important functions, one of the important controls over R is greater than G is what's called progressive taxation. So the tax rates are higher for wealthier people, and that money is in turn, if it's spent properly by the government, creates a converging force, creates a converging effect. CollegeNET's very aware of this problem, and higher education plays an extremely important role in this because one of the most important converging forces is education. It's the most important rung on the ladder for economic mobility. And that rung on that ladder right now is broken. It's broken because of the tuition bomb, right? And these lobbyists, in a large measure, were saying, no, government's terrible, they shouldn't spend the money on education, leave it to themselves. Those are the crazy people that protested against the Vietnam War. Screw them. And so, of course, you're left with try to do your own thing, and one of the ways in which you handle it is to increase tuition. But now we've created this terrible barrier that we have to break down. The other important problem, this is an ethical problem. This is where CollegeNET and we get to play, importantly. This is how we can change if we raise our platform, we can change the way capitalism works. This is the invisible hand paradox. This is the famous statement from Adam Smith, 250 years ago. He said, "The rich are led by an invisible hand to make nearly the same distribution of the necessities of life had the earth been divided into equal portions among all its inhabitants, and thus, without intending it, without even knowing it, advance the interests of society." Okay? This faith that somehow capitalism, the invisible hand, if I just work in my self-interest, screw you guys, I'm going to get rich. If I operate like that, that's going to be fine, because capitalism is going to take care of us, you see. Now, history gets written by the winners, right? But economics gets written by the rich. And this, what I think is a despicable idea, persists because it's an apology for the ways things are. It's an apology for control by the rich. And it's an apology for divergence. I disagree. Here we have the popularization of this. Greed is good. And we have then the enshrinement in academic circles of what's called neoliberal orthodoxy. That the self-interest, this beautiful paradox, that if you operate in your self-interest, don't worry about it, it's going to redound to the common good, you see. And the way we even enshrine this, there's a little subtle indicator of what's going on here when we talk about, we hear this, it actually annoys me when people talk, well, you got to give back, okay? And it's important to give back. Well, it's only important to give back if you've taken in the first place, right? And so we have, at the universities, we have people who are enshrined, capitalists that behave in ways that are not necessarily to the common good, not necessarily to the benefit of society. They're enshrined and blazoned on the business school or whatever because they're giving back, no matter what rapacious thing they were doing along the way for themselves. Well, CollegeNET's out to crush this, out to change it. We're out to exemplify something new called symbiotic capitalism. And we still preserve the paradox. It's true that the direct personal interest is in the common good, but guess what? The reverse can be true as well. But you can't do it with blinders. You cannot do it with blinders. You have to think about what's common good first, and then figure out how to wire it so that you get something out of it. But it always has to be driven by the common good. It has to be driven by what the benefit is to society. Now, this might seem to be some kind of radical Portland notion or some voodoo donut thing. But guess what? Guess what? We've all heard of Google, right? Google actually started not because somebody figured, oh, there's a business model, we can prove how we're going to make money. No, they had a search engine, an algorithm they thought was really cool. And they have a little phrase called do no harm. Now, I don't agree with the way they make money, which is largely to try to understand all the innards of my mind in order to schlep some product at me. But the fact is they started the business thinking about how can we create benefit. And I do benefit from this Google search engine. I think all of us do. So it started with the idea of delivering benefit to the broader society. They said, trust us. We'll provide this powerful algorithm. We'll make it work better than any search engine that's extant, and we'll figure out how to make money later. It started with thinking about the common good. That's what we need to do as a society. We need to do more of it as a society. Because you saw that curve, remember that curve I started with? That curve where I showed that it was tradition that defined the future? The problems that we're seeing in the world, in my opinion, have to do with the collision of the certitudes around those traditions colliding with the radical change that's occurring in our world. That collision is happening and playing out right now in our society. So we need to be able to rethink the way we're building those innovations so that they redound to the common good. And we can start with that. Now, what's really interesting about this paradox? If you can figure out how to deliver common good and you can wire some self-interest out of that, you're going to make way more money than you'd make if you start thinking about me, like Tom Peters was advocating. You're going to make way more money. CollegeNET's fine. You'll see our offices. They're pretty nice. Okay? We make plenty of money. We have a chance to make a lot more if we can both elevate. But the way we do that is through this paradox. It starts with thinking about the common good and figuring how to wire that into self-interest. You start with that. I call that symbiotic capitalism. So we want to construct symbiotic models that build from common benefits. Now, this isn't as easy as it sounds because there's this curious thing called the benefit paradox. There'll always be a demand for things that are actually against the common good. When I was driving home from work on Friday, I listened to this gentleman on the radio. He was a kid who, at age 19, had paid for his own home. He had 2 fancy cars, and he was providing what people wanted, right? What people wanted were these upper pills, or whatever they're called. I don't know, there's a whole bunch of different pills out there. He had a deal with some pharmacist. He could get these pills, sell them for 10 bucks a piece. And over time, he was saying that he himself became addicted to these pills. And now what he was looking for, what he demanded in the economy, and what he'll get from the economy, what he demanded from the economy is, he says, I'm looking for the stuff that where I know people are dying. I want that stuff. That's the stuff I want because I know that's the stuff that's going to make me feel right. He says, I'm stuck. Okay? So that's the worst case, of course. But there's all kinds of examples because our human body is wired to do things that aren't good for us, strangely. We should grab sugar at every opportunity. It's really important. Well, why? Then, of course, we have a diabetes epidemic in the United States. Our body's wired to do all kinds of things that aren't good for it, but you're going to be able to get all the sugar you want in the United States of America, no problem. And by the way, if you sell sugar and you don't care about benefit or a common good, you sell sugar in its various forms, you too could get self-interested and rich and have your name on a business building too and be some kind of a hero when you quote-unquote give back to the Diabetes Foundation. That's all possible. That's not what we're doing at CollegeNet. No way. No way. We have a responsibility, and we believe that higher education, if business is taught at higher education, it ought to be taught not in obeisance to Adam Smith, not in obeisance to Gordon Gekko, not in obeisance to the capitalists who thinking about themselves first and then later giving back after they've collected their hundreds of millions. No, it should start with thinking about the common good and converting that into self-interest and thinking carefully about what's beneficial in our world. We need that. We need that because we see this collision between those who believe that the world should be as the traditions say it should be, as the Quran says it should be, as the Torah says it should be, as the Bible says it should be, as the Constitution says it should be. The collision between that certitude and what's actually happening in our world. We're the ones that are defining what's happening in our world because we're innovating. So our responsibility is to go at that in a different and better way. Give up on this thing that's 250 years old and start thinking about symbiotic capitalism. So here we go. Here's how CollegeNet is able to play in this. And because higher education is at the epicenter of what's going on in our world. You've got to have higher education in order to participate in the global economy. What you're doing is really important. What we're doing together is very, very important. So this rung, education is the most important rung on the ladder of economic mobility, is now broken in the United States of America. 77% of the students who attend your institution are from above the median income. 93% of the students who are graduating from your institutions are from above the median income. This is stupid from a human capital development standpoint, really dumb. We're going to fix it. So one of the things CollegeNet's doing is we have decided to do our own little Robin Hood thing. We collect money from advertisers, and we've figured out this algorithm that has so far given over $2 million to students who are writing essays, competing with each other, and communicating about all sorts of things in life. They're learning how to write, they're learning how to interact, and they're earning scholarships. Another thing we're doing is we've published the upside-down version of the U.S. News and World Report. One of the things that's happened with neoliberal orthodoxy, this idea that me, if I take care of me, I'm great, is that it's caused the university culture to become one of self-aggrandizement, quite frankly. And it's all about my position in the U.S. News and World Report, no matter how inefficient that happens to be, and how arbitrary. Mort Zuckerman sits there as this big capitalist in his corner office in Manhattan. He decides what you're supposed to go after. That's crap. We have a big problem in this culture, and that problem is the complete and utter divergence of rich from poor. We got to fix it. And so what CollegeNet has done is introduce the Social Mobility Index, which looks, when you look at the rankings, like an upside-down version of the U.S. News and World Report. It celebrates institutions that recruit students from below the median income, that graduate those students, and that get them into good-paying jobs. Another thing we're doing, obviously, as I said before, is we're working with the coalition to improve access and affordability for the disadvantaged people in our society. And finally, I'm going to show you, through Jeff Bolton's eyes, our Vice President of Emerging Technology, this wonderful system. Now, if we can take our blinders off, let me make a prediction. In the next 5 or 10 years, almost every institution in this room is going to be using Standout. Since March, we've had 4 institutions sign up, including the University of Michigan and Portland State University. You're going to use this system. If I've been sure about anything about the future, and I can't be 100% sure because, again, I'm stupider than I think, this system is one you've got to take a look at. So thank you very much for listening. And let's think together about making the world a better place. Let's think about recasting the way we act in the global economy to look for benefit for everyone, and then worry about ourselves later. Thank you.